Welcome to the Point 254 podcast. This is a podcast where we explore the activities of the US mission in Kenya. Diplomacy comes in many forms, both seen and unseen. We look to amplify the US mission's activities in Kenya in order to connect, inform, and educate. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Naomi Mutua. My guest today is General Michael E. Langley, and he's the commander of the US Africa Command, AFRICOM. Karibu sana, General, and please introduce yourself better and tell us what AFRICOM is about.
Naomi, you just defined everything. But let me go ahead and start from the top. U.S. Africom, and Kenya, the KDF, Defense Forces. We have a deep partnership going forward. But just taking a step back, what defines United States Africa Command? Of course, being headquartered in Stuttgart, Germany, but we spend a lot of time across the African continent with our African partners, security partners. Mm-hmm. So what defines AFRICOM, what many don't know, is we are a 3D organization. And if you'll indulge me for a second, let me explain that. When we say a 3D organization, we're multifaceted, but we also have multi-members across our interagency and across the U.S. government. So the first D is diplomacy. That's when we engage with the State Department and have representatives from the country team in our overall mission. And then there's a development piece. That's the United States Agency for International Development. And then the defense piece is AFRICOM proper. Okay. But collectively, we work together with our African partners to ensure that we achieve shared goals of stability, security, that will affect prosperity. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so development, diplomacy, and defense.
Yes.
The 3 Ds.
Yes.
How do you balance your AFRICOM's military objectives with broader development and diplomatic goals in the region, and in particular for Kenya?
Yeah, so I would just say my approach, even when I took command back in August 2022, Kenya was one of the first countries I came to, because I knew that the strength of that regional partner and what they offer as far as being able to export security. So I had needed to get here and listen and learn. Listen, learn, and assess of what the security situation was and where Kenyan forces were deployed across the continent. And listen to what their objectives were, not only just from the Kenya Defense Force, but national objectives, all the way from the president intent on down. Because I, too, take my rudder steer, mm-hmm. if you will, my guidance and direction from the President of the United States. And in his national security strategy, it is pretty clear of what my approach should be. That's one approach of this will always, in a partnership-centric approach for U.S. AFRICOM, mm-hmm. it is always African-led and U.S.-enabled. So I do come here to listen. I do come here to learn and understand.
Well, when you consider that Africa is a vast continent of 54 countries, we have a saying that Africa is not a country. But you, as AFRICOM, you serve the continent. But how then do you distinguish between the independence of each nation, the nuances, the unique intricacies that define each people? How does that come into play for you as AFRICOM?
That's why that campaign of learning is so broad. Mm. I understand, in my area of responsibility is 53 countries. Egypt is in the central region as far as our responsibilities of geographical combatant commanders. So I have 53. And that understanding and acknowledgement, these are sovereign countries, different mm-hmm. cultures, mm-hmm. different tribes, different clans, and holistically they do have territorial integrity and sovereignty and their own ideas of the way forward for stability and security. So I listen. Okay. I listen. I don't come here with my template or my plan. No. It's the opposite of that. I'm listening and taking guidance. How we can be able to address our shared objectives or shared values, especially in democracy and freedom and rights of the people.
Okay. And I know that from your history in your career, 37 illustrious years, that you've really traveled through a lot of what many would call hotspots, from Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia. So you do have actually an insight into what Kenya is. But the one thing that has been a very big problem is terrorism across the region, across the entire continent. So we see global influences from groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. We see the action from local, or rather Africa-led cells like Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram. Are you able to discuss with us what the most pressing security challenges are for us in Africa today, from your perspective, and how you're addressing those?
Naomi, that's a great question, because this gives us a time to take pause and reflect on how terrorism has affected our countries, both of our countries, as 9/11 anniversary. But
Which
I also
is just
acknowledge
yesterday.
Yes, it was just yesterday. But I also acknowledge what happened on 7 August 1998 here at the embassy. A lot of Kenyans lost. A number of Americans were lost. Went and laid a wreath yesterday over at the memorial. So terrorism has disrupted the lives of many citizens here in Kenya and also in the United States. So that shared objective to be able to deter and defeat terrorism is a monumental task. And I will just say this. When you address what the enduring solution for counterterrorism is, pretty broad. It takes institutional capacity across governance to be able to intervene or prevent it as a whole. Because as I looked, whether it be Afghanistan or whether it be across the Middle East or the Maghreb, I listened and learned how it happened and what are the drivers of instability that begetted a false ideology of the Islam religion, Islamic extremism. And I listened and learned to other agencies that are addressing this problem, trying to intervene at the lowest levels in civil society to be able to prevent the indoctrination of military-aged males and going into that false caliphate or jihadism. So there's many other ways other than just a security construct as a whole, a government approach to establish that. And that takes bringing civil society together in that civ-mil divide to prevent it from happening in the first place.
Yeah. All right. But we know that you're not always looking at a combative front,
Right.
but you have a lot of peacekeeping and humanitarian missions across Africa. Could you tell us some of the interventions that you've been involved in? And these are, I know, such a wide range, from health missions, disaster recovery, and I was even surprised to learn even veterinary activities.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. I know, just as even in the Sahel, and I know we just pulled out in Nigeria, but State Department and USAID were very active because they've been affected. Across the Sahel in West Africa, Niger, there was a program. It's still active because of the effects of climate change on the herds and irregular climate patterns, reduced crop yields, and some of the herds were affected, and the vaccination program was U.S. enabled to ensure that's done. So we look across all the drivers of instability because they're layered threats. So that's how we holistically have to look at the problem set and decide on how it what's the way forward?
Okay.
And that's collaboration with the host country and by their permissions to be able to move forward. But let me address another point here. I just spent earlier this week in Somalia, and I met with what they call the TIS-3. That's the Transition Initiative for Stabilization. And that's what we were just talking about, giving it civil society down at the local level and bringing in the military as a security construct, but working with local ministers in that community to be able to establish a framework that would deter a Al-Shabaab takeover of their governance. So things like that, those stabilization activities work. They get return on investment. So that's what I have to say. Those are some of the examples that I do, but every country is different.
Okay. And I was curious about how technology has impacted your work. We know it's changed the world for both bad and good.
It sure has.
Yeah. And which also means that crime has evolved very differently. How do you approach this technological advancements, and how do you address threats for Africa? We have cyber terrorism, we have cyber warfare, we have transnational crime.
Yeah.
Are there any examples you can give us on how you deal with this?
Oh, yeah. So, that's some of the things that we do in assisting our partners. But holistically, what really is the what type of is advancement of technology? And today, I think what really affects the ability to be able to achieve the objectives of prosperity and stabilization is the information space. I'm talking about, and I'm getting to it, is misinformation and disinformation. That is very compelling, very influential across civil society and sometimes across militaries. Look at the number of coups d'etats that we've had across West Africa. And that's concerning. So being able to identify that and trying to get with the host nation and establish their capabilities to identify misinformation and disinformation, and so they can put out the true information, so it doesn't affect civil society, and false ideologies, if you will. So I think that's all too important. So we do need to protect our networks, because some of misinformation and disinformation is hijacking some of the websites, false websites, or replicated type influencers out there that may not have the best interests at heart for that particular country. So that's what we do, engaging with our partners to establish collaboratively a capability to do that.
Okay. And as we wind down, so we see other activities from AFRICOM. We have the Chiefs of Defense Conference coming up in 2025.
Yes.
And this is one of many training and learning activities that you carry out.
Yes.
Why do you do this, and especially with your African partners?
Wow, that's a great question, Naomi. And we'll just reflect back onto back in June, we had the Chiefs of Defense Conference for the first time on the African continent. We used to do it in Rome and across other places in Europe. But I said, no, this should be owned by the African continent, because we're bringing together more than 40 chiefs of defense from various countries. And we had it in Botswana. And it met its expectations. A collaborative sharing of ideas, exchanges of solution sets from the regional challenges, from Southern Africa to West Africa, East Africa, and then across the Maghreb in North Africa. That's unmatched. I know our competitors try to replicate that, but what we do here is led by the African countries, African militaries, to bring together and address some of the same challenges but coming up with shared objectives and solution sets, how to address problems of transnational crime, violent extremist organizations, climate change, building resiliency, and closing the divide between the military and civil society. All those things are tabled, and we discuss it and come up with solutions. So that's the value in having the Chiefs of Defense Conference.
So a lot of learning, a lot of investment, and integrated engagement across the board.
Yes, Naomi.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been a brief interview, but we appreciate your time, and we hope to see more of you in Kenya.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Our guest today has been General Michael Langley as we discuss the role of AFRICOM in the region. Thank you for joining us. This has been the Point 254 podcast with your host, Naomi Mutua.